Thank you, Senator Bell. Senator Hancock.
You don't want to answer that question? No. I agree with a great many things that Senator Bell said. And, you know, most particularly for me is what the pro tem alluded to, which is the urgency of the current situation. Sometimes I really despair for the future of the planet. We have set something in motion that may almost be irreversible now. History will be watching, I think, as we adopt this plan. So if the details really do matter. I agree with much of what my colleagues have said. I think the rail and the integrated rail transportation up and down the state and from suburbs to job hubs is going to be critical. Transit operating costs are not really addressed in this measure, and it may be something we need to look at in another venue, what the funding sources will be for that transit operating, because right now many transit districts operate on a shoestring, and then they have to debate whether they're going to cut routes or raise fares, which becomes very difficult for low-income people. I think the housing piece is going to be critical, affordable housing in our central cities. And more developers in my area have been, as part of the requirements in the planning, have been giving transit passes for 10 years to all the residents of the buildings they're building. And I think we should look at ways of incentivizing that kind of thing, so that not only do we have people living near transit hubs, but it is easy and affordable for them to use, getting to work and on weekends, the transit that's available to them. But I am very interested in the definition of disadvantage and how it's going to play in. And partly that's, as the chair alluded, for example, I represent communities that have enclaves of very high-income people and enclaves of persistent poverty. In Oakland, for example, we have the Port of Oakland, second largest port in the state. Horrible pollution from trucking and from the port itself. I want to make sure that we don't have situations where communities like that are excluded because of the average median income in that community. Similarly, the city of Richmond, and indeed a great deal of northern Contra Costa County, has 9 oil refineries in it. The preponderance of oil refineries in the state. There have been both catastrophic and ongoing air pollution issues around that. But again, there's also high-income areas in that city. So my question is, what is the timeline for the process of working these things out? I think this is a really excellent framework. I'm assuming it's going to be discussed with the governor and with the air board in the next 2 weeks.
In the assembly.
And of course in the assembly. No, of course, in the budget committee. But will there be trailer bill language? Are we anticipating that? And how will we really close some of those detailed gaps so that we are setting up something that will truly be an ongoing framework?
Here would be my commitment, I'm sure Senator De Leon would share it, that before the first dollar goes out, that this key question of how to ensure that disadvantaged communities within less disadvantaged regions are not only not left out, but are paid the appropriate attention to. Whether or not we can figure out the detail of that piece and those key pieces in the trailer bill, which would accompany this funding strategy, I don't know yet. But certainly, before the first dollar goes out, this question needs to be adequately answered.
Yeah, and
It's complicated in terms of how you do it.
And it's a full 25% of everything we spend.
I understand.
But you know what? Just like we have an achievement gap in our schools, we have an environmental gap in many of our communities, so we got to close it.
But not coming to the final formula on that question within the next 2 weeks should not hold us back from putting this template and funding strategy and as much detail as possible into place in the law so that we know where we're going and we know what follow-up work needs to be done immediately to ensure that when the first dollar goes out, the question is answered.
Are we assuming that the metrics for measuring the greenhouse gas impact of individual projects, which Senator Bell and Senator Pavley talk about a lot, how will those metrics be established? Are we thinking that the Air Board will do that?
Yeah, the Air Board in consultation with the regions, that's exactly how it will work. Just as the Air Board is setting targets for the regions under SB 375, it will be the Air Board in consultation with the regions.
I could say something on that. In the budget subcommittee, we proposed for the approval a allocation of funds for the Air Board to set up the administrative staff and the infrastructure to do these kinds of analysis that we're talking about, to look at the transportation, air quality impacts and measure projects and all that. You'll see that in the budget proposal. So the Air Board proposed that, and I think, by the way, I think the Air Board staff that analyzes the air quality impacts and greenhouse gas emissions have a good handle on that.
So too.
They've been working very hard on this, and they've done a good job. They need a bigger kind of group of people, professionals, to accomplish what we're trying to do here. So we put that in the budget, and we're proposing that be included in the budget. So, yeah.
Thank you, Senator Hancock. Senator Bell. Senator Anderson.
Actually, a lot of the questions I had have been asked already. So I'm just going to go through a couple, 3 items, and that is, so as I look through your bill, I'm trying to figure out just how this would work. You have the breakdown, and I don't have a problem with the breakdown that you have, but I'm wondering down the road, as things change, we may have some areas that excel, maybe based on the fact that the experts in those areas are more efficient and get things done, and other areas that don't do as well. So what would be the flexibility, and down the road, would we have to rewrite another bill like this to address that issue, or how would that be addressed? Because some areas, natural resources, 7%, and then I have a follow-up question on the natural resources.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. As we move forward and hopefully successfully, obviously if some projects are much more efficient than others, and we see that we actually have to move some of the pieces and with regards to percentages to meet our carbon reduction goals, we always have that flexibility as a legislative body. Obviously, we will be here either statutorily or through the budget process. So those opportunities always exist. These numbers that are before you are a part of a framework, a construct. And
right.
Obviously, it's part of an open discussion with regards to where does it make sense, where do you get the most bang for your buck in terms of the investments in this overarching, or I should say overall portfolio. But as time moves forward and we start achieving our carbon reduction goals, we may find out that we may need to change our portfolio mix, if you will. This is a fluid, it's a dynamic, it's a live document that provides us as a legislative body the flexibility to make the modifications that are necessary. It's not etched in stone. I think that's what's exciting, that we provide a framework from which we can build from and make the necessary modifications as legislative body as we see fit.
Under moving forward on that, under natural resources, you'd gone through and said there's 7%. When I look at that, what was proposed, it talks about forestry and parks and disadvantaged communities. It talks about water efficiency, infrastructure projects, forestry, landscape issues, wetland development, waste diversion, and recycling. All sound great, but in the area I live, we're ravaged by fires. And have you put any thought into fire protection as part of it? Because let me tell you, when those forest fires hit, it has a definite impact, a much greater impact than Los Angeles on a bad weekend.
I think that's a really good input, and we ought to take a look at that. I would point out...
I'm sorry, I missed what you said. What did you say?
I said, Senator Anderson, you're always a friend, and we agree when we agree. And this is an area where we agree. I think that's good input and helpful. I would point out more broadly, though, one of the things it's important to say that with some of these categories, of course, like, for example, transit has no permanent source of funding. And as you know, the transit folks have been searching for years for that permanent source. With some of these other categories, there are already existing sources of funds outside of the cap and trade or climate change program to try to meet some of the needs. There's fire fees and other things. That's not to say that we shouldn't do all that we can within this frame, but just to point out that there are some areas where there really are very few, if any, resources going from the state of California and other areas where there are significant resources.
The fire fee doesn't really help because it only goes to educating people with brochures. It doesn't put boots on the ground. It doesn't put shovels in people's hands. It doesn't pump water. So when we have a fire fee, that's more of a punishment than a solution. My last question is, I know that we're letting CARB develop a lot of the nuts and bolts of this. This is a broad picture, but when you were laying this out, were you thinking in terms that there would be clean vehicle rebates? And if that's a big function of this, because I see that as a big function, would there be any kind of a means test, a financial means test, on who would qualify for those rebates? One of the concerns I have is everything that we're doing with this costs money. Everything that we're doing with this is making poor people poorer. It's not giving them access. And when we're competing for jobs in our communities, I look at some of the areas in my district where we have hardworking, blue-collar folks, and as we start to limit how they can get access to their job, I'm worried about what that means for them. So if they're paying a pollution tax because they're driving an older vehicle and they want to do that upgrade, but they've got some guy who's making $250,000, $300,000, $1.5 million, $2 million, and he's getting that rebate, there's not enough rebates available. How are we prioritizing those folks? Because what I'm concerned the most about this plan is, for the uber rich, it does not impact them. It doesn't change where they buy their toilet paper. It doesn't change where they work. It doesn't change how they make their money. It does change my constituents' ability to live and live free.
Senator Anderson, you sound like a Democrat.
We agree where we agree. I heard from a great leader.
No, I mean, you sound like a Democrat. I mean, I'm not going to add too much to what you just said because we agree with each other completely, and what you just articulated is pretty much the frame of SB 1275, my measure, which is also that construct is within our cap and trade program. We don't want to impede working people, the working poor, from getting from point A to point B, obviously, and penalize them. We do recognize that a large portion of these individuals of this lower economic strata are driving outdated models that obviously disproportionately emit higher levels of CO2. So how we do this in a very intelligent way without penalizing them is absolutely critical. What you described is SB 1275. In fact, I would love to have you as a co-author of this measure, that offer that to you right now, if you're willing to accept.
Well, I think that you've already made a commitment to Darrell today. I'd be happy to look at it. Of course I would be.
I know we have any number of people who would like to speak at public comment, so if we don't have any other questions for our authors, I guess my presumption was accurate. Do you want to do a quick count? I think it's probably around 40. It could be 50, 60 people.
Yeah, I think 60. And counting. Wow. 75.
A room full of public comment. So to be respectful of all of those standing behind you in line, I'm going to ask, of course, if you could be as succinct as possible. If everyone took a minute, we'd probably be concluding around noon. And I know we have other things to get to today. So we do want to hear from you. That's the purpose of public comment. We're focused, we're listening. But again, if you could be as succinct as possible, try not to repeat if you've heard something said before you, and be thoughtful of the person behind you in line. And with that, I welcome you to public comment. And the microphone is in front of you. We'll start right at the table.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Panay on behalf of the California Refuse Recycling Council, 125 recycling and solid waste companies. We'd urge you to look at the 7% that you've put into natural resources, the waste and recycling sector, and look carefully at that. And I'll give you a couple of points why. The AB 32 scoping plan reflects on waste in the landfill, which is 20 times greater impact targeted for than CO2. That's the methane. So we would like you to look at that because we think that cutting that down, and your EQ committee is going to be hearing Mr. Chesbro's bill and Mr. Williams' bill. We think that that has the greatest impact overall. Cutting emissions of short-term climate pollutants like methane can yield immediate climate benefits. We think it's a double benefit. They call it a net negative. The waste sector is one of the few sectors that can create a net negative, which means it's a double positive. A double positive means that we take the organic fragment that's going into the landfill now, and we produce a gas, we produce electricity out of that. And that means that our net greenhouse gas emissions go below zero. So we'd like you to consider that. We think that
Mr.
overall,
Panay, if you could conclude, please.
we think that overall we have shovel-ready projects. We think that the 7% that you've allocated on the natural resources side is small. We think you should increase that because of this double benefit that taking the organics out of the landfill has immediately and in the long term. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Panay.
Ann Nothoff with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and we're pleased to support this long-term competitive process that's been laid out today. I just thought I would share, as the chairman said yesterday, the president announced this broad carbon pollution reduction rule, and coverage in the LA Times today says that California is 2 steps ahead. And I think with this type of investment and putting really meat on the bones of how we are confronting and combating climate change here in California, we'll be 3 steps ahead of the game. And getting electrifying our transportation sector is really going to make a huge difference, and having affordable transit-oriented design that will actually, I was going to respond to Senator Liu when you asked about increasing the percentage for transportation. If you really look at the 20% in the sustainable communities, that's actually reducing the demand for transportation. So you're getting an expansion effect there on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Donoff.
Mr. Chairman, members, Mark Watts. I'm here today on behalf of Metrolink, and congratulations to the Senate leadership for the presentation today. The comments by Senator Jackson, Monning, and Bell, and frankly Senator De Leon, with respect to the rail piece, prompted me to come up here. There's a little bit of a clarification I'd like to put on the table. In our laws, when you talk about intercity rail, it does not include commuter rail systems like Metrolink or Caltrain, so I'd like to make sure that's a nuance, but that gets considered because I heard some of the interest. And frankly, Metrolink is going to be the high-speed rail partner in collaboration to bring folks into the intercity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's Senators Bill McGavin with Coalition for Clean Air. I want to first thank Senator Steinberg, Senator De Leon for a proposal that gives the state excellent opportunities to not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also fulfill other statutory requirements from this legislature, including the investments in disadvantaged communities, which are set at a minimum of 25%. We think they should go higher. And also important other benefits like improving air quality and creating jobs. We worked under Senator De Leon's leadership for many years to pass his SB 535 into law. We think it's important at this point for the legislature to tell the administration, as some of you have suggested, that there needs to be a precise accounting to make sure that those benefits are actually delivered to California's most polluted and most impoverished communities, that projects beforehand need to go through a process to make sure that they will deliver those benefits, and then afterwards there needs to be an accounting to make sure the benefits are delivered. And to respond to the issue raised by Chairman Leno and Senator Hancock, we think there is a solution. If the legislature decides that the money should be allocated regionally, then the CalEnviroScreen tool could still be used to identify the disadvantaged communities within the regions. All it would take is for the legislature to instruct CalEPA to present regional maps, which they're very capable of doing. I think it's important that this CalEnviroScreen tool, which has been developed in a transparent public process with a lot of work going into it, be utilized and not be thrown out the window. At the same time, it's appropriate for the legislature to make sure that there is regional equity.
Thank you, Mr. McGavin.
Just also wanted to add another priority for us is the low-carbon transportation program, and others are speaking to that, but I did want to support Senator Anderson's suggestion that there be a means test for the rebates.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chairman Leno, members of the committee, Senator De Leon. Paul Mason with Pacific Forest Trust. My colleagues at Trust for Public Land asked me to speak on their behalf as well. We're both active with the Natural and Working Lands Coalition to try and bring some focus to the opportunities in the natural resource areas. I appreciate all the focus that Senator Bell and others brought to the need to have some good metrics for keeping track of what we're accomplishing. I really want to highlight, though, that the science on many of these things is still evolving, and that we need to maintain some openness to adjusting priorities based on that. And I just want to highlight, particularly in the forest sector, because a new study is just being completed by ARB, working with UC Berkeley and others, looking at the forests of California, which we have historically assumed were sequestering carbon and were, as a default, part of our solution. As they've taken a closer look at forests in other natural land, looking at Chaparral in Southern California, we're actually seeing that they're a huge source of emissions, probably on the order of 50 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. That would be close to 10% of our overall emissions profile. And so as we become aware of these really significant changes in our assumptions, I think we need to leave ourselves the latitude to adjust our expenditures. And I would suggest that we would be well served in the short term in the context of this year's proposal to increase the appropriation for natural resources and be aware of those adjustments in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Mason.
Thanks.
Bill Higgins with the California Association of Councils of Governments, which includes all 18 metropolitan planning organizations responsible for implementing that far-sighted bill, SB 375. I just wanted to make the point that we're part of a larger coalition, the Transportation Coalition for Livable Communities, and what we like about this proposal are that the pots can be integrated through those plans. There's housing, there's transit, there's a general sustainable communities pot that can fund the active transportation programs and the infrastructure necessarily to glue all those different parts together. And this is a partnership between the states and the regions. We have, and I've distributed, or in the process of distributing to your staffs, projects that are ready to go from our regions that are identified. And we have this staff and the resumes of staff who can pick these projects and get them out there, and we're willing to roll up our sleeves, work with you, and figure out the details and the protocols to make that happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Higgins.
Good morning. Erica Morehouse with the Environmental Defense Fund, and we appreciate that this committee is considering a range of investments that will not only reduce climate pollution, but also provide health and economic benefits and lock those in for decades to come. And the need is great and vast, and so you have many opportunities before you. And EDF has been working with several partners closely, including the Transportation Coalition that you heard from, sustainable communities, local government, and finance. And as you move forward, we want to make sure that, as the proposal describes, the expenditures are subject to the requirements of existing law, including planning and SB 375. We also hope that you continue to emphasize a competitive investment process, which can ensure the maximum feasible reductions and associated benefits. And finally, as Senators De Leon and Steinberg both noted, it's important that we include a high degree of flexibility so that we can learn as we go and address investment gaps as they evolve.
Great.
Thank you so much.
To the second. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mary Rose Turok with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and a leader in the SB 535 Coalition. Our coalition is supportive of many of the priorities set out by the proposal. We had surveyed our coalition throughout the state, communities that live next to refineries and freeways and power plants, and our priorities that we know are working for greenhouse gas reduction in our communities are low-income energy efficiency, low-income solar, affordable housing and transit operations, urban forestry, and clean freight. And so we see these in the proposal. We're appreciative of the leadership of Senator De Leon in making sure that no communities are left behind, and why SB 535 is in statute. Now, what we're asking for is we want to make sure there's a tool that accounts for the benefits to disadvantaged communities. And so the SB 535 Coalition has actually developed such a tool, and we want to see it adopted. We've been shopping it around. The tool basically has 4 checkboxes that say, in order to meet SB 535, that the projects or the programs meet an important community need, that 2, the benefit is significant to that community. 3, the primary beneficiaries are low-income residents and households. And 4, that it avoids substantial burdens like displacement to communities. And so we want to see that tool, some accounting tool like that, adopted for this for these investments. And that also
if you could conclude, please.
Yes, and then we support the CalEnviroscreen and making sure that robust tool actually reflects regional rankings, and so we're supportive of top 20% per regions to answer that question or about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Roman Partida on behalf of the Green Lining Institute. We want to thank the committee for ensuring that SB 535 commitments are part of the proposal and for adding transit to the budget proposal. Public transportation is key to low-income and working families in California, so we ask that the committee also include affordable housing in its proposal. And we also ask for the adoption of a communities benefit tool, as previously discussed, for Senate Bill 535. Green Lining also asks the Senate to fully fund low-carbon transportation or at least match the levels in the governor's proposal. Accelerating the transportation of the sector to zero tailpipe emissions is key to meeting our AB 32 goals. Thank you.
We thank you.
Good morning. My name is David Katrowski. I am with the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority. I'm the managing director, but today I'm here before you on behalf of the 5 intercity passenger rail agencies, the 3 existing services, the Pacific Surfliner, San Joaquin, and Capital Corridors, and the 2 emerging corridors in the Inland Empire along, and as well as along the Coast Rail Coordinating Group. We are very pleased to hear and to see the leadership from the Senate put forward the 5% for intercity rail. We think it is important. It is similar call out to what has been in Prop 1A and Prop 1B. Those have been very successful programs. For what has been part of that investment over the last 20 years in the Amtrak network, in their system, the 3 corridors in California represent the 3rd, 2nd, and 5th busiest. Combined, those corridors take off 355 million annual vehicle miles traveled, which equates to 109 million less pounds of CO2 reductions. This has been recognized by Senator Jackson and her leadership with the Senate Select Committee. I also want to talk about, highlight what was brought up today about that 5% for intercity passenger rail and the commuter rail agencies. As I mentioned, Prop 1A and Prop 1B have identified in the past funding discretely for intercity passenger rail. That is not a silo. We use those funds to work with the freight railroads as well as the commuter railroads to work on shared corridor improvements that will improve mobility, reduce greenhouse gas, and provide a connectivity between the urban regions as well as the rural regions.
Mr. Trusky, if you could conclude, please.
Okay. And that concludes my comments.
Great.
Thank you very much.